Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to Casey Lee Live Software Edition. Slightly different setup because we got something kind of interesting going on today, actually. Something that's been a long time coming, lots of planning. Well, not a lot of planning, but just a lot of talking about it and finally getting down to it this week. So pretty excited about what's happening this week. So welcome, everybody. If you guys are new to this channel or you're new to this series, first of all, if you can help me out, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when we go live on this software edition. But basically what this is it's something that kind of came out of the kind of COVID-19 pandemic, obviously. I had seen other people doing live streams, and I thought, hey, maybe I should get into live streaming. And, this was kind of combined with, I know classes were kind of shutting down, or they weren't sure what was going to happen with classes and classes going remote. So I thought it'd be a great idea, or thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of do these Casey Lee Live software editions, where we basically go over software concepts, teach software concepts, and also have kind of an open Q&A to discuss, software concepts. Now, as it is kind of more on the technical side, so it is really geared at coders, programmers, engineers, computer scientists, whatever you want to call them. But anybody who programs, basically, it's kind of geared towards that, and anybody who wants to learn that as well. But there are also overlaps in things in terms of like process management, product management, these kind of things. So if you have any questions about that stuff, definitely feel free to ask. A lot of these sessions, we try to kind of gear them towards what people we're trying to gear them towards what people want to see. So if you're joining and you're watching either live or later on, feel free to message me on the YouTube video. Feel free to also message me on Twitter. I don't have my fancy graphic tonight, so my Twitter handle is CASEYLI23, so at Casey Lee 23. You can message me there. And again, keep an eye on the live streams here. So again, Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern is typically when we do this. Now, one thing I have to announce today, and I'll be sure to mention this at the end as well. Maybe a bit of sad news for people, maybe not. I have no idea. Maybe it's a better way to do it. But I am actually reducing the frequency with which I do these live streams. Typically, I've been doing them weekly on Thursday nights. Unfortunately, I feel myself getting a little bit burnt out. Week after week. I have a lot of things to do in the evenings, and I feel like it's taking its toll a little bit. It's getting a little bit hard to keep up with a lot of these things. So I am actually reducing the frequency of the Casey Lee Live software editions to every 2 weeks. So I'm going to take a break next week, come back the week after, take a break after that, and so on and so forth. So we're going to go down to once every 2 weeks, and we'll see how that goes. If we get more audience and we get more participation, and you guys really want me to come back weekly, I'll definitely consider it. But as of this point, I think I just need to take a little bit of a breather, every week or so to kind of gain back my energy and get back to it. So definitely appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving me up until this point. But yeah, definitely, sometimes it just gets a little bit, it's a decent amount of effort to put into these things, and to chat for an hour and a half to 2 hours. But don't get me wrong, I really enjoy it, and I really appreciate the support that everybody's been giving me, and this channel and these live streams. So if you're brand new to this, there is a live chat. I am monitoring the live chat over on my other device here, so definitely feel free to chat there, say hello. Do know that these are public chats though, so if you have any privacy concerns about your username or the things that you write, you might want to just take that into consideration when you're chatting here. They do get replayed even in the recorded version, so just be mindful of that. And if you guys are not joining us live, again, don't forget, or you can't join us live, don't forget you can watch these things recorded afterwards. After the live stream, 5-10 minutes after, 20 minutes after, sometimes depends on YouTube's processing. Basically, they will have it live and recorded afterwards. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the kind of housekeeping items. So what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks is we have been diving into React. So React is a front-end framework, and when we talk about front-end framework, we're talking about the web's front end. So when we talk about front end in the web, we're really talking about languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And really, it's kind of bringing some sanity and organization and some, kind of process and structure and architecture to how we code our JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. In the past, when we use libraries like jQuery, jQuery gives a lot of power, but it never really gave us any architecture or framework on how to code a lot of our stuff. And particularly the JavaScript kind of got out of control. So there were a lot of front-end frameworks that were introduced to manage, I would say probably primarily to fix up the kind of JavaScript. But that being said, these frameworks do handle CSS and HTML in a really nice way and are changing the way we program HTML and CSS as well. So there are a lot of frameworks out there. There's Angular, which again, I have no experience in, but apparently it's a full MVC client-side framework. There's frameworks like Ember, React, Vue. There's a couple others as well that I'm probably missing. I'm sure a lot more actually. Meteor, I believe, was another one as well. And React is the one that I kind of gravitated to and is gaining a lot of popularity actually. React is a framework that was coded by Facebook and their developers, and it's gaining a lot of traction. There's a lot of I know there's a lot of jobs that are wanting React these days. A lot of people looking for React as well. Now, when you pick a framework, it can be definitely something that is not an easy thing to do. And a lot of times, sometimes it's hard to figure out whether you've chosen the right framework or right language or whatever, right? And in general, for me, I would say like it doesn't matter a ton, because as long as you are learning things well, you can translate a lot of those skills and a lot of that. You can translate a lot of those skills and a lot of what you learn in one framework to another framework. And that can, so it doesn't really matter what you're stuck in. Now, that being said, it is interesting to explore other frameworks sometimes just to see what's out there and see what you're missing. And that's kind of what we're doing today. So it looks like we've got a couple more people joining us. Ricky Dam, regular weekly viewer, Ricky Dam. He has not missed a week since he started joining. He's on the live stream now. So hello, Ricky. So today I actually have a guest. I remember very, very early on, one of our early viewers, Mark, who's an awesome web developer. He's going through university right now, and he's got awesome design skills, awesome web development skills. He said it would be great if I could have guests on the show. And so the big part of me was like, that sounds pretty good, but I don't know technically how this is going to go down. And to be honest, tonight I still don't technically know how it's going to go down, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm going to bring in a guest of mine who I've interviewed on my podcast, so definitely check out my podcast, Casey Lee Talks to People. Hey, Mark. Mark seems to have joined us as well tonight. Definitely check out my podcast, Casey Talks to People, and listen to my interview with Dave Chapman. So Dave Chapman is someone that I actually worked with at a company called Teldio. So it is a company that's been around for probably 10, 11, maybe 11, 12 years now. I joined in 2011, so I think it was up and running a couple years before that. And I actually was one of two people who was kind of in charge of interviewing and hiring my guest tonight, Dave Chapman. And it's kind of funny looking back at that time when I was kind of interviewing him and kind of testing his skills and stuff like that, and to see what he became in my life, which is someone I very much look up to and very much respect a lot when it comes to his opinions. I think you meet these people in your life where every now and then you just trust everything they say. They'll say, oh, you should use this library, you should use this framework, you should use this language or whatever. And everything they say is just like, yes, of course. And Dave is definitely one of those people. He is I've mentioned this on my podcast, but he's definitely somebody I called the best software engineer I've ever known. And I want to really put that into context, which is it's more than just the way he codes. It's more than just about the features that he delivers. It's really about, I feel like, his approach to software engineering, how he decides to learn things, how he picks up things, how he looks at software in terms of product management and process management, and what makes good software and what makes bad software. These kind of things, I've kind of experienced over the years that have led me to this statement, basically. So very fortunate to have him join us today, and he is going to teach me Vue. So there is this slight, I don't know much about it, but I'm pretty sure there's some kind of slight battle going on in the front-end framework world between React and Vue, because I believe they're quite similar. I don't really know Vue, and I'm going to find out tonight what it's all about. But they're quite similar in their approach, that they are a Vue only front end framework. So they're not a full MVC, so a model view controller. They seem to more just handle the view side of it. So that's kind of where they're kind of similar, and we'll see where the similarities stop and where the differences start. But I'm gonna bring in my guests. So thanks, Ricky and Mark for watching, and anybody else who's watching. I'm gonna bring in Dave. Now, I do warn my audience tonight that I have no idea, again, the technicalities of this. Ricky and Mark, you guys are listening. Please let us know if you can hear Dave when we bring him in, and please let me know if you can see him. I have a feeling there might be some sync issues, but that's okay. So we'll bring in Dave right now. So hello, Dave. You're on screen now. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I said it'd be like a 3 to 5 minute intro. That was definitely a 10-minute intro there. So once I start going, I start going. So yes, Ricky and Mark, or anybody else who's listening out there, let me know if you can hear Dave. Dave, thanks for joining us. Again, I said there was a lot of chat about us doing this, but it was tough for me on one hand to figure out technically how we would do this with all the gear, and then on the second hand, it was trying to figure out what exactly would make sense for us to do. Like, what would what would make sense in terms of content for the viewers and what people could learn from things. You were the one who actually came up with the idea of teaching me Vue. I'm curious, was there anything, like, was there a reason why you thought about that, or did it just kind of come to your mind, or?
I mean, I'm kind of in the opposite boat of you compared to you, right, Casey? I have very little experience with React. Anything that I know about the other frameworks is kind of, just stuff I've read. And so I mostly think it's really interesting to be able to teach you some React and get your kind of see what I'm not teaching you React, teach you some Vue, and see what your comparisons are, the kind of questions that you bring up and stuff like that.
Right.
So
one thing I did want to ask you about, and I mentioned this before we got started, was you and your team. I mean, you manage a team of 4 or 5 people or so. Is that right? 4 or 5 developers, or?
Yeah, we have about five
developers, right? And when you talk about Vue, it seems like you guys actually had some kind of methodical approach to deciding what you wanted to like use. And it's funny because like the way we got into React was not methodical at all. Like I very distinctly remember one of my developers, I ran into him at the food court, and he said, "Hey, like, we should try React or whatever." And then I went back from the food court to my office and tried it out, and then that's kind of how we started going on it. I mean, not exactly, but basically roughly that. I'm curious because I'm wondering if you can tell me what you. I mean, I think I know, but I'm not exactly sure what you guys were using before that, and why you decided, that Vue might be something that you needed. Like, I mean, because when we were working together, we were dealing with things like Backbone, Marionette, these kind of things. I don't know if Vue was being used on the same project or was it used on a different project. And so why were you exploring these frameworks, and why did you decide that it is something that you wanted to use in the end?
Yeah, we were starting a new project. And so we had the opportunity to kind of start fresh. Up until then, we were using Backbone and Marionette, and that was compared to the new frameworks. I mean, that has some pretty huge shortcomings. So we wanted to look at the options. I think mostly the ones that we were considering were Ember, Vue, and React. Which all kind of sit differently in the spectrum of how opinionated they are. So we just wanted to find what kind of fit our team and made sense for us. And we ended up, landing on Vue. There's a ton of attraction towards React because it's so popular. There's a huge community and ecosystem around it. But I still find that, at least my understanding is, if you build a React project or build a project with React, you're making a lot of decisions. Like compared to like what we'll probably even see just from, getting our project set up. I mean, yeah, you can use create React app, but that really doesn't give you any decisions or any control at all. Whereas with Vue, they just have such a clean kind of setup and environment. I really like the API that you use to actually build stuff. So it just, and the rest of my team kind of felt the same way. Like, we actually did kind of a week of playing around with the different frameworks, and Vue was just kind of what we landed on as what felt right to us.
That's interesting. So you guys actually, like, your team actually fired up like the different frameworks and actually tried them out, or?
Yeah, we went through some tutorials and played around with things and built some basic apps, and yeah, Vue just what was the one that we landed on.
Very cool. I'm interested, you kind of being one of the more senior people at Teldio and ultimately, being in charge of a lot of the software development that goes on in there. Did you feel any kind of weight in making that decision and kind of giving people the go ahead, or was it very obvious that, you guys all agreed that, what, Vue is the way to go and we're just going to go with it?
Yeah, I don't know that I felt like there was a lot of pressure or weight or anything like that in the decision. I mean, we talked it out as a team, and as we have that discussion and everyone's kind of on the same page, it's kind of like, well, we're making this decision together. There's nobody saying, I have these good reasons that we shouldn't be using this framework. Right. So it worked. It was, and we're still really happy with the decision. Cool.
And then just kind of just touch on a little bit of what I was saying before, and about choosing, like, I think when people get into software development, a lot of times people do feel the pressure of, like, am I doing the right thing, or am I choosing the right framework or the right language or whatever. And, we talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but I think it'd be good to kind of, this kind of slightly a new audience if they want to hear it. But, I mean, do you have, I mean, a lot of my audience comes from university, and they're students and they're watching. Mm-hmm. And a question I do get a lot asked a lot is, like, what framework should I use, or what framework should I choose? And so if you had students coming up to you who are relatively new to web development, or any development for that matter, and they're asking you, like, should I use React? Should I use Vue? Should I use Ember? Should I use whatever? And then, like, should I use Rails? Should I do PHP, Python, whatever? Mm-hmm. What do you think you would tell them if they're really, like, green and they don't really have experience in any of these frameworks, or very little?
I would basically give them the same advice, like, as what we did, is just try some stuff. If anything is interesting to you, try using it. And if you use it and you're still interested, just keep going. Because, like, ultimately, it doesn't matter what framework you're using. Any of the modern frameworks, they're using very similar approaches. It's not that different. A lot of the concepts translate between frameworks. So if you're thinking about it from a perspective of, well, what's going to help me get a job, I don't think most respectable employers are going to say, oh, you have a bunch of experience with framework X. Oh, well, we actually only want people with framework Y. They're limiting themselves by forcing that issue. So
yeah, that's right. And I mean, like, again, yeah, because I mean, I guess, like, again, when you joined Teldio, actually, we talk about this a lot. Like, your JavaScript skills actually weren't really, like, your strong suit, right? And mm-hmm. you just worked on them, and within, like, I always had this misperceived conception that you were this JavaScript expert from the beginning. But it's just something
Yeah.
you worked on while you were on the job, right?
Yeah. I mean, at Teldio, I was kind of, uh, in some ways, thrown in over my head, and yeah, I realized very quickly that there was a lot of things that I needed to learn, and so I put the time and the effort in needed to be able to get done what I need to get done, and that's usually what people are looking for, right? When they're hiring somebody, is, do they have the motivation uh, and just the ability to pick something up, and they have something that has to get done. Can they figure it out and push through, all the headaches that kind of come along with any, new software like platform or tool that you're using.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, if you guys want any taste of what Dave and his team are doing, definitely check out teldio.com. But more specifically, is it d3mradios.com or the d3m?
Yeah. D3M
D3M
Networks.com. Yeah.
Networks. D3mnetworks.com. Definitely check it out. They recently just posted a video that's like a 90-second little explainer about what D3M Radios is, or D3M the app is, and it's basically a screencast with a voiceover, and it really gives you an impression of like, wow, this app, what it does. And when you're watching it, don't forget that it is a web app, and that always blows my mind when you're watching something and it's like, wow, this just looks like a desktop app, but it is a web app. It's got the snappiness, responsiveness, and kinds of features that you would expect out of something like Google Docs, Sheets, these kind of things. A really powerful diagramming tool. And what I find very impressive, actually, when I watched it, I watched it like a day or two ago. Mark posted one. So Mark is one of the founders actually of Teldio, and when I watched it, I remember thinking to myself, D3M has always had that kind of snappiness and performance kind of interaction that I am now experiencing with frameworks like React. Like my JavaScript front end never felt snappy and stable and as fast and snappy as when I did with using React. And what I find very impressive is, again, D3M was built. I mean, when did you join Teldio? Was that 2013?
2013.
So 7 years ago,
Yeah.
3 years before even any of these kind of frameworks showed up. Using things like Backbone, Marionette, these kind of things, and it's again got this really really snappy, stable feel in an app where there's heavy diagramming, very visual aspects like spreadsheets and a lot of stuff like that. So definitely check it out. D3mnetworks.com and check out the work that Dave's doing. Ricky, Mark, and anybody else that's joining us, feel free to ask questions as we go along. But we're going to kind of dive into the kind of interactive coding part now. And we will still have a Q&A at the end as well. So if you guys have any questions that you want to ask Dave later on, we can definitely do that. Okay, so we're going to switch over to my laptop here. So me and Dave are on the corner. Again, Ricky, Mark, anybody else, if you're having trouble seeing the screen because I forget to switch me and Dave off in the bottom right corner, let me know. So today we are talking about Vue.js. So this is like, there's been two things that I've always like, Vue only recently because Dave has brought it up so much, but things like Vue and Flutter are two things where I'm like, maybe I should give them a shot, because I always have this diplomatic's the wrong word. Maybe diplomatic opinion where I'm like, yeah, they're probably just as good as another one, but I just never tried them. But it would be nice to have a little bit more of an informed opinion by actually trying these things out. So here we go. This is Vue.js. It is another front-end framework that solves, I believe, would you say, Dave, that it's trying to solve the same problem that React is trying to solve?
Yeah, it goes a little bit further than React. I mean, the official core team for Vue does build a lot of the libraries surrounding Vue, like for routing or state management, stuff like that. Whereas with React, all of those libraries are just third-party libraries built by someone that felt there was a need
Yes,
for
definitely,
it.
definitely.
Not built by the React
Well,
team
well, that's the
themselves.
interesting thing, right? Because like how I got started in React was I got started with React through Rails, right? Because so I was integrating React with Rails, which by the way was such a pain back in the day. That's why I remember you messaging me one day and saying, "Hey, like Rails is going to officially support Webpack through Webpacker, and they're going to officially support React through it." And I was like, "Oh my god." Because it's such a pain to organize before. But what's interesting about kind of using React and the Rails, having Rails as your back end, but also handling all your page routing and all that stuff, React just becomes, pieces on your page, right? It doesn't become a full blown app. It just kind of pieces on your page. And it wasn't until recently when I started taking on a project that was fully built in React that I started realizing these things. Like I needed a router. I needed like ability to handle, any of that kind of redirect and all that stuff. And all the complications that come along with that, actually. I didn't really realize it till then. So, okay. So what we've done previous to this is Dave just had me install the Vue command line interface. So Vue CLI. So if you guys are watching my previous videos, you know that we were dealing with Yarn. You're totally happy to use NPM. Totally okay to use NPM as well. I just happen to use Yarn because I'm slightly more familiar with it. But I'm starting to realize the slight complications with having both Yarn and NPM on the same machine. But yeah, I do have Yarn installed. And then using Yarn, we downloaded a global package called Vue CLI. So now I have access to a Vue command line command here. So I can type things like Vue version and other things I'm sure Dave's going to show me. Okay, Dave, you can talk. You feel free to give a little introduction to Vue as well. Like we don't have to jump right into coding if you want to tell us a little bit about Vue. And
well, I mean, Vue is just a front end framework, and it's component based. So you build components. Everything is built out of components that usually have some sort of template or UI associated with them. That's not always the case. It can be more behavior related. So you can wrap components with a behavioral component that's going to give that component that you're wrapping more behavior. But components is the kind of core idea here. So, but beyond that, I mean, I say we just jump into it and start seeing what it's like.
It's interesting that you mentioned that kind of wrapping idea, actually, because that is an idea that came up in React, I believe, a little bit later, like in React's kind of development. I wonder if it came out of Vue or whatever, but it is still a topic that I am not super familiar with, actually. And that ability, again, to wrap another component to give it more behavior or more whatever control or whatever. So, okay, anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. So the way you get started with Vue, if you have the Vue CLI installed, you just use the Vue keyword and create command, and then you give it a name. So whatever you want to name your app, and then you just hit enter. So that kind of starts the creation process, and you end up in this kind of choosing what you want. So you can go with the default, or we can walk through manually to just see what the options are. You can use the things that are pre-chosen there are generally things that you'd always want. If you want to use TypeScript, if you want to have a router, if you want to have Vuex, which is the state management, if you want to use Sass in your components instead of just CSS, if you want testing built in, you can choose all these things here. Now, for what we're doing today, we can probably just stick with the defaults here.
So I'll just hit enter.
So you can just hit enter. So then it'll just ask you about the linter that you want to use, and ESLint with error prevention is probably fine. So you can hit enter again, and lint on save, that's probably fine as well. And here, you can put all your configuration either in package.json or you can have each of your configurations, Babel, ESLint, and other configuration all in separate files. And that's usually what I do. So I would go in dedicated config files. And then you can decide if you want to save this as a preset for later or not. So say just give that a name. Yeah. And tell it what you're going to use, either yarn or npm. And so this installs everything for you. And so again, what I really like about this process is, first of all, you get some choices. If you want TypeScript, if you want Sass, if you want, I use Prettier for my formatting. So I just save my file and it reformats everything for me on save. So, code style and those sort of things are like a discussion of the past. We just do what the tool tells us to do, essentially. So you can choose all these things, and then it gives you like a production environment out of the box. So yeah, you can now CD into your folder there, view demo, and you can see it's already set up as a Git repository and everything. And you can run, you can run yarn serve, and you'll want to open that folder up in a editor as well. So you can see it started a server on port 8080, so you can go to that and just see what it's given us here.
Cool.
So this is kind of the starting page, and so we can look at the code and kind of see how this is working in general. So everything goes into the source folder there. Actually, in public, there's just an index.html really. So if you look at that, really all that's important here, for the most part, is line 14, just that you have a div with an ID that you can attach to.
Right. So this is kind of like the equivalent of like kind of React mount points. Right?
Yeah. And so if you jump into main.js,
so is there somewhere in here where like the JavaScript gets imported, or?
Yeah, so line 15, their built files will be auto-injected there.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So that this is the first Vue component. So you kind of instantiate Vue here on line 6. You give it a render function. Now, again, especially when you're getting started, and you'll see this, like, you don't need render functions in Vue. Render functions are normal in React, but in Vue, the render function is something that you opt into when you have certain more complex things that you need to accomplish that templates don't accomplish for you. So this is just creating a Vue component with a render function that's just rendering the app component and mounting it, and it's actually replacing the div that has the ID of app in index.html.
Okay, so is this this here? This is just kind of regular like ES 2050? Is like this is like a function like this with return? Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. And that H is like equivalent to create element, I think, in React, if that makes sense.
It's funny. So like in React, right, you have the JSX syntax, and the JSX syntax kind of like you can use create element or the JSX syntax. So I'm actually not familiar with create element at all because I use JSX. So
So This is just kind of the mounting that initial component. So if we jump into app.view,
sorry, just to back up on that, the app. So the
Yeah.
app component. So does Vue come built in with already made components like app?
Well, yeah, it's giving you this as kind of a base.
Oh, okay. Oh,
to
right.
work
Sorry,
with.
because there's
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, I didn't see that. There's app.view from here. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And so, yeah, this is what you'll typically see and what you'll typically be working with in Vue is this is called a single file component. And so you can see at the top we have the template tag. And what's really interesting, and this is in contrast to using something like JSX, if you get HTML from a designer, you can just drop it in here and it works. Cool. All regular HTML and CSS like is compatible. Like you just drop it in and it just works. With JSX, that's not true. There's certain things that like the class attribute that you need to change all those. So that's kind of a quirk there.
So
with that.
Because there's the class name, there's the for keyword, like labels for inputs, and then you also get a little bit hairy too with things like style. Actually, like style in React expects like a JavaScript object. So things like that. Yeah, cool.
So this is one thing that I really, really like about Vue is that looking at this, you basically have your template, which is just HTML. Down at the bottom, you have your style, and that's just CSS.
And is that scoped?
And then you
have automatically scoped to this, or is it because we're kind of doing that?
Yeah, so this style is not scoped by default. So anything that you put in the style tag for a component is going to be globally used in the app. But if on line 19, you just added a scoped like binary attribute to that. So you just type scoped. Yeah. Now that's it's awesome. Scoped.
That's really good.
So you, and just to be clear so everyone understands what that means, if you don't have the scope keyword, if I have a class that I'm using in this template and I have some CSS here, and then I have another component that happens to use the same class, the CSS I put here is going to affect the element that's coming from another component.
Right. So if I had like emphasized,
but
and then I had like, and I don't have to clap.
Look at that. You already know how to use Vue.
I don't, and I'm not typing this. Emphasize. Okay, so then if I said font weight bold, but then I had another component where emphasize was like font weight 800, those would now conflict with, like, they would affect other ones, right?
Yeah, they would conflict, and which one gets chosen is based on, I think, which component gets executed last, probably would win. So if you add in the scoped attribute to the style, that totally takes that problem away. And now the CSS won't affect across to other components. That's super handy,
actually, because that's a problem actually I've been dealing with it in React, that it's not easy. Like I still haven't fully figured it out yet. Like, so I'm so used to Rails asset pipeline, and in the Rails asset pipeline, I'll still do my own manual scoping, and so that's what I've brought over to React. And so and I know there are ways to do it in React, but everything I've tried, it's a pretty complex setup. So that's really handy actually.
And this is like a perfect example of a case where, I have this problem with my CSS, and I'm using React. how do I solve this problem? Well, you search on Google and you find 5 different libraries that will solve the problem, and then you pick one and you try to make it work.
And it doesn't.
Yeah. So then you try a different one. But all of this stuff comes like set up out of the box with Vue, which is
and again,
awesome.
so inside a single, you call it single file component? Is that what it's called? Or single?
Yeah.
So in a single file component, this stuff is kind of already hooked up, like the style here and the script here and the template, they just automatically go together. Okay.
Yeah. 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 So what else to look at here? I mean, all we see is that in the script tag, we are importing another component, the hello world component. And line 11 to 16, you can see it's just an object. We're just exporting an object. And Vue 2, and in the next version of Vue, this will still be kind of the default way to do things. You have this options API is kind of what it's called. And so when you want to set up your component like this, you just need to know the kind of API that's available in this object. And so we'll start playing around with some of those to see how that works.
Sorry, this is kind of meant as an options object, kind of like that you're exporting, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we were not using the hello world component here, we wouldn't need the script tag at all. All of these sections, the template, the script, and the style, are all optional. You don't need those. So if you don't have any style for this component, just don't include that. If you don't actually need any, behavior in this component, and it's just showing a template, just don't show the script.
So if I want to create my own component here, so my component dot view, it could basically be, let's have autocomplete. It does. Okay, sweet. So it could be just that, and then over here.
And so you could go, you can close that main.js. You won't use that anymore. So in app.view, you can import my component. And then you just need to add it to the components object there.
Oh, okay. So whatever you add here is now usable up here.
Yeah. Okay. And you can set up components to be globally available if you want, but this is typically how you would set it up. So if you scroll down to the bottom,
very cool.
Look at that.
Wow. Okay, that's very, very fast.
So if you want to do kind of the token, like have a button that increments a number example, we can do that. So I would just delete like lines 3 to 5 there, and we won't worry about components right now. We'll just work inside of this component.
These.
Yeah, you can get rid of that. Get rid of the imports. So, I mean, first things first. How do we show that we need to set up some dynamic data? So we want to show something dynamic in the template. So how do we do that? Well, there's a data option in your component. So under name, you can add a data function.
Like this?
You can do it that way. I mean, you don't need the function keyword either. And you can take out the colon.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that case, you don't need the fat arrow either. Yeah.
I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know
and then you
do
just
that directly on objects. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. So then you can return an object here. Yeah, so just now I can put something inside of this object. So I can say, count 0. And then I can go up into my template. And so to use dynamic data, I use double curly braces. And then I can just type count inside of that. And that's accessing the data. So if you go back to your view, you should see count 0. So then the next question is, well, how do I make a button? Well, you've already proved to me that you know how to do that because it's just HTML.
All right.
So you just add a button with some text inside.
I so rarely use the actual element button. Like I always use a link or like an input or something. So cool.
So now we have a button. Now we need a handler, or we need to be able to activate some behavior when we click that button, right? So there's a methods option in your component. So you can under data add methods, and this is just an object. So you do :object, yeah. And in here we can add an increment method, and this is a function. And all we really need to do in here, so we can access data on this. So we can do this.count, plus plus, or whatever you want to do. And right now that's not going to do anything because we haven't said when I click the button, I want to call this method. But how you do that is, just up here, you do @click. So the @ is for any events. So you can do like @mouseover. You can do what other events are there?
Right.
Key down.
Are they named? Is it all in lowercase like HTML, or is it like camel case like JavaScript? Or
yeah, it's like HTML. Yeah. And then you can just say equals, and in quotes you can put increment.
Cool.
And now when you click the button, you get some incrementing numbers.
Wow, that's quick. By the way, getting some love already for Vue from Mark. It is actually pretty simple to do CSS class scoping in React, but Vue makes it even more simple. Very cool.
I don't know, I don't know how much work it is to set things like that up in React.
Yeah.
But the key differentiator to me is that like in Vue, you don't have to set it up. Right?
It's already there for you. Yeah.
You just add the keyword.
Yeah.
And for most things, and this was way more so the case like back when React first came out, but you have to make a decision at some point. Like there's usually something you run into and you start having to make decisions about, okay, which library am I going to use? Let me do some research to see what the most popular thing is right now.
Yeah, totally.
So
cool.
Yeah, so that's how that works. I mean, if you want to try to get a little bit more complicated and see how far we can go, we can look at making a little to-do app.
Yeah. Well, actually, okay. Well,
too.
let me ask this then, because like I guess maybe I'll think about some paradigms that I use in React and see how they would work in Vue. So one of the things that I do a lot in React would be something like, so I would kind of do something like this. So let's say, we had a product like MacBook Pro 16-inch. And then what I would do is I would have, say, a link here. That would be like view details. And then I would have here like, like $23.99, stuff like that. So ideally what happens is when this is not shown in the beginning, and then when I click view details, it reveals itself. So I'm assuming, okay, so data returns an object. Okay, so I would maybe have something here that would be like, show details would be false. Am I on the right track?
Yep.
Okay. Now, okay, well, so this is where I don't know how I would use that though. So how would I do basic conditional rendering? Like, how would I not show this if it's false, but show it if it's true?
Yeah. So Vue has something called directives.
Okay.
This is something that came from Angular. In Angular, though, you might be able to do custom directives in Vue. I've never done them myself, but this is where you see like some kind of custom HTML elements,
Okay.
Or attributes, I should say. So on the div, you can do a v-if, v-if.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you just say equals quotation.
Okay.
Show details.
Okay.
So now it should be hidden.
And then, okay, right. So
then you need some way to toggle it.
Right. So toggle details. So then down here, I'd do toggle details. And then I would do this dot show details equals this dot show details. So click on that, which would call this. This will grab whatever's current. Do that. Okay. And then around. Okay. Cool. Oh, and
you can also do inline functions in your template as well if you want to do that. I think people tend to prefer having actual methods, but you can put curly braces inside of that toggle details or inside of those quotations, and then just take your code out of toggle details and drop it in without the this. In the template, you never need to reference this. So you might. Did you take it? I can only see part of.
Oh, sorry. Here. All right. What can you?
There we go.
Okay.
That was on my end. Show details. What's it complaining about? Shorthand property initializer.
And that's as far as it goes down for me.
Yeah, you might. Does it make sense that you'd use double curly braces there?
Find out.
Might be. You can tell I don't do this very often.
Yeah.
Typically this.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, there is some way to do inline functions. That's okay. We can move on from that actually. Okay, so let's see here. So that's really cool. And then if I click it again, hides it. Okay, so how does the v-if work? So basically, like, so I'm assuming Vue has a bunch of built-in things like this. These kind of custom attributes.
It has a bunch of those.
And they're called directives.
Yeah. So yeah, there's custom directives, but.
Okay, v-text.
So typically what you would be using is like v-if, v-else, v-else-if. There's a v-show, which is very similar to v-if, but has slightly different behavior. There's v-for for doing like for loops essentially in your template. And yeah, there's other ones like that at symbol is actually a directive. It's a shorthand for v on, so that you can replace those at symbols with a v dash on. And you can do just :click. I guess that this is another way to do it as well.
Okay.
That you're looking at.
Sorry. So this is at click is a shorthand for v on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Normally you would see it as v dash on : click equals increment.
Okay.
And looking at I was just looking at the inline function stuff. It looks like the problem was that we were using curly braces. You actually didn't need them at all.
Oh, okay. So you just do show details.
Yeah.
Show details
equals not show details. Yeah.
Right. Okay. We have a question from Mark. Not sure if I fully understand your question, Mark, but basically, how does data flow in Vue? Not sure. I mean, I'm wondering if like where you change it versus where it gets affected. Like, I guess with React, you know that anytime you call this.setState, you're automatically calling render after that happens.
Yeah. So there's two questions there, right? How does Vue handle render?
Right.
Re-rendering is, very similar to React. It's using a virtual DOM, so it's only it's analyzing the differences between what the DOM needs to be and what it is right now, and does the minimal change to make that happen. So it's not re-rendering the whole component every time. You're not going to be losing focus on your inputs and stuff like that, or that sort of thing. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of data flow,
looks like he's clarified a little bit. Like in React, we have this kind of parent to child flow, and then there are ways we can pass data up to the parent, but
I think the way it's normally referred to is data down and events up or something like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And exactly the same thing in Vue. It does the same thing. So typically you're passing data down through a prop, and then you can emit events back up to the parent.
Cool. Actually, let's let's dive into that a little bit. So let's say I have some data here, say products, and then let's say this is an array of objects. So let's say MacBook Pro. And let's say MacBook Air.
Got all the prices memorized. You've been looking at the looking at buying a new computer case.
Okay, so all right, so I guess this is good. So let's say I'm gonna rename this component then to like a product component. Okay, so it's gonna be a product component. So somewhere in here, I'm gonna have like the name, and I'm going to have the price.
Yeah. So what I would actually encourage you to do is build this out in the other component.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we'll just pull it out.
Cool.
Because I think that also, I don't know how this compares to React because I haven't done it, but it's just so easy to just grab the stuff that you built and pull it out into a component.
Right.
That it's definitely the way that I prefer to work.
Cool.
It's a lot easier.
Okay. So yeah.
Right. Here first of all we want to show the list, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're probably going to want some sort of wrapper div or something like that. And then yeah, then you have a div for each product. So we can build out one of those right now.
Oh, right. Okay, so I see what you're saying. So kind of manually code it.
Yeah.
And then, so do you recommend basically I take the first element and kind of put it in there, like hard coded, or?
Well, we can put in the dynamic value.
Okay.
Well, yeah, either's fine. I guess we don't really have the data that we want to use yet, but
Like if I were to,
yeah,
I could, I
yeah. If you
guess.
just do that, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, put like I don't know, A and B in there or something, so we can see what it's rendering. So there you go. There's your product over there. So we want to see this A and B twice, first of all. So what you want to do is use the v-for directive on the div on line 9.
Okay,
So it's going to be
so you put the loop.
v-for. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So if I
Yeah,
put a
it's on the elements that you want to see multiple times.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so v-for.
And so then equals quotations. And then inside of there, you're going to say like product in products.
Right. So products is coming from the data, and then we're just going to do like a loop in, right? Okay.
Yeah. So then on line 10, well, even now, if you save that, you should see it twice. It's saying you need a key directive. So just like in React, you need a key on your list.
Oh.
You need the same thing in Vue. So here you can just do, you can use the name. So just be product.name. Cool. And you'll need a colon in front of the key on line 9.
Like here?
No, in front of the key attribute. So by putting a colon there, that's shorthand for vbind. So that's how you bind an attribute's value to some like dynamic data. Okay. So yeah, any dynamic things like props, you would put a colon in front to bind that value. So yeah, now in like on line 10 and line 11, you can just do your curly braces and product.name, product.price.
Cool.
Now you got your stuff there.
Sweet.
So yeah, then the question is, okay, I want to pull this out into a component. Now, like in this contrived example, like I guess if there's CSS with it, you'd probably want to pull it out because that is kind of nice to keep that.
So why don't we add some basic? Okay, so I have a product class. Let's say.
See your design skills on the fly.
Something. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right.
And of course, you probably want a $sign in front of those prices as well.
Yes.
And that's super easy to do, right? You just throw a $sign in front of the curlies, and
cool.
You have that. So, one thing that I might mention on just in comparison to Vue, or to React. In React, you're using a render function, right? And you can put whatever you want in there. Like it's just JavaScript.
Right.
You can do tons of crazy stuff in a render function. And so when the renderer or the compiler that's actually compiling that JSX and that JavaScript into a function that can be passed to the virtual DOM engine and re-render things, it's really hard to optimize a renderer function automatically. And so you end up having things like component did mount and component will update or something like that in React.
Yep.
You don't have those in Vue, and you don't need them. You don't need them because when you're using a template, Vue is actually way smarter about what is dynamic in the template and just the engine behind it is able to be more efficient, and it just knows so much more about it because a template is much more restrictive as to what you can actually do, and it knows what's dynamic and what's not. So you actually get a lot of performance benefit out of this. Now React is still really fast, so like it doesn't really matter that much, the performance difference. But even the fact that you don't need to do these sort of optimizations that you would need to do in React with component will update, component did mount and stuff like that. That I think is really, really interesting. An interesting comparison between Vue.
Let's see how that plays out then. So let's continue with this and kind of extract it because I'm curious how props get passed down. But I'm curious. I'll maybe mention like one of the number one reasons I use component did mount and see how that works in Vue. So okay, so if we want to extract this to this, so I'm assuming I just at minimum copy and paste this piece. Right. So I'll paste that into here. Now I'm assuming something's going to change with this v4.
That whole v4 and key you can cut out of there because you don't actually need it in there anymore. Right. You're going to need it back in the other template.
Right.
So yeah, now you can import.
Right. Okay. So I think I know how this works. Okay. So I'm going to import product from product.view. Or do I need the .view?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. And I think it would be components /product. Is that where you put it?
Yeah. Sorry. Right. It's underneath that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so here I have to export components, right?
Yeah.
This is an array?
No, it's an object.
Okay. What are the keys and the values?
Well, don't worry about that. Just use, you just put the name in here, right? And it gets spread out. So the key and the value is
the same.
Same.
Okay.
Essentially.
And then,
the key is the name of the thing.
Right. So now I can use that up here. So I would change this to product.
Yep.
And since it's v4 on that, it's going to iterate over that.
Yep.
Okay.
And so now we just need a prop, right?
Right.
Because we need to pass the product in.
So yeah, you would do colon. Oh, okay.
In this case, because it's a dynamic prop, and you can name it whatever you want. Product equals product.
Is there formatting wise, like do Vue developers do stuff like this?
I do. I mean, Prettier does that for me.
Okay.
When my lines get too long.
And then in this case, I'm passing in just the product.
Yep.
Which is coming from product in products.
Yep.
Okay. So that passes the product in as a prop to product component.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I access that in here?
Yeah. So now you need what's it complaining about there? That template root requires exactly what I want. Oh, you need to save that file.
Oh, yes, right.
I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, now you need your script tag. And so your component is just export default object. And then there's a props key.
Okay.
And this is just, it can be an array or an object or array of objects. Here we can just use an array and give it the string products or product.
Okay.
So that should be in quotations. Yeah.
Okay.
And that should actually be all you need to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so props and data are kind of the equivalent to props and state a little bit in React.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then our style, just a style tag. And then grab this. And I'm going to scope this because it's a class and I'm afraid there. So do that. Save that. Save this. What did I do?
Yeah.
Mix spaces.
Mix spaces and tabs.
Okay. Where am I mixing spaces and tabs? Product view.
Yeah, it's saying it's in this file. If you just select everything and click on your tab size at the bottom there, I think, and then convert indentation to spaces or tabs, and then say that again.
Okay. Is that the linter that's doing that? Or is that...
that must be ESLint.
Okay.
A rule there.
All right. So what is
So yeah,
there?
Scoped isn't working there for some reason.
So if we remove it, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to work out of the box. Yeah, when I was playing around with things ahead of time, I didn't.
Right. This is
sometimes
the problem, right? When you're doing tutorials and stuff.
Yeah.
Is it possible because we didn't select the CSS preprocessors in the setup, or is that not related at all?
It's possible. I mean, it looks like it's just from the Vue loader package, which would be set up. Anyway, I think so. I'm not entirely sure what the problem is there, but
that's good. Okay, so so that's great. So now we know how to throw in props. So I will say right off the bat, yeah, really like the simplicity. I will say the one thing that definitely I think would take some getting used to coming from React is what is interpreted like as JavaScript versus like this the whole directive thing.
Yeah.
Is definitely a little bit confusing coming from the React world because kind of in React you're generally anything that's JavaScript related you're kind of like not escaping but you're like putting in certain in curly braces. So kind of understanding that we're putting, like functions that we're defining here and stuff like that is definitely a little bit confusing. But again, I'm sure could easily get used to over time. Okay, so back to what we're talking about what we might use like React component lifecycle methods for. So one of the number one places we use component did mount is kind of setting a loading state. And then as soon as the component mounts, we go fetch data and then we display that data, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, actually, I would actually be quite a bit lost on here. So what if I had some kind of function that said like fetch Ajax data? We won't actually fetch Ajax data. We'll just hardcode the data that returns. What would that look like exactly? So as soon as this mounts, I want to make an Ajax call to fetch data and then have that data render in this loop here.
Yeah. So Typically what I would do there is you'd have a flag in data that would probably start like loading is true or something like that. Well, like loading colon true, right? To set that value. And so then you can have like a VIF. Yeah.
Okay.
And then underneath you can have another div that's VIF, or sorry, V else. Yeah. And you don't have to do that. It knows that you're elsing the if above. So it's just V else. There's no equals loading.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then you can put, loading. So yeah, if you save that, you should see it just switch to loading.
Oh, wait, be opposite.
Yeah, it should be opposite, I guess.
Okay.
There we go. So yeah, there are still lifecycle methods that get called. So this is where like my limited knowledge of React, like component did mount,
Yep.
might just be a lifecycle hook for mounted.
Right.
And
yeah.
So component will update might be the more relevant thing. I just know that there's some things in React, there's some functions that you just don't need because of the renderer. But anyway, you'd probably add a created a lifecycle hook. So as soon as this this component gets created, we'd initialize a request. And then when that request comes back, we would set loading to false and set the products array to be the data.
So is that in methods we would have created, or is that a specific thing that is in the object that?
Yeah, that's a specific function.
Okay.
So yeah, created. Yeah.
And so that's a function. Okay.
Yeah.
So this, like, as soon as. Cool.
Yeah.
And then so in this case, okay. So so all this stuff is hanging. So the data is bound to this in this case. So I can actually do like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then.
Yeah. So one important thing there is you might think, oh, maybe I don't need products in data because I'm setting it on 37, but you do need products in there ahead of time.
Okay.
That won't necessarily be the case in Vue 3. That's kind of an improvement they're making, but it is the case here.
Actually, curious about this setting, because so one thing in React is you kind of set up your things that you're changing, but then you call this.setState kind of as one global thing at the end, right? Like, so like if I was doing a bunch of stuff here, I'd set up all the variables, and at the very end I call this.setState. So it kind of all gets set together, right? So there's no fear of like, okay, well, if loading is false at this point, then it renders like an empty set of products or whatever. Is that kind of the same deal here? Like, will all these get updated kind of together at the end?
Yeah, the Vue has a runtime loop. It batches updates.
Okay.
So it has something called it has the loop, and each run of the loop is a tick essentially, and so that tick is only going to run a certain amount, like to maintain a certain frames per second. And it's basically like a game engine,
right?
So it's just you're gonna set all these, and then at the end it's going to actually do the render, which is gonna render the new virtual DOM and compare it and do the update.
All right, cool. Okay, so it's 9:20, but why don't we kind of go maybe until 9:30, Again, Mark and Ricky and anybody else who's still watching, if you guys have any questions, maybe start getting those prepared. But why don't, for the next 8 minutes, so why don't we kind of continue on? I mean, you mentioned kind of a to-do app. If we can kind of, kind of like a to-do app, but more for products in this case. Like adding a product, deleting a product, these kind of things, right? I think one thing that'd be interesting to see is forms actually kind of being similar, like to React or whatever. So, and actually it'd be interesting to see how that communicates back and forth, because I would almost picture that I would create a product form component, but the result of submitting that would actually update the app.view up here. But maybe we take your approach about coding it in here and then moving it down or whatever. Okay, so why don't we start with adding a new product? So let's say we have a form here. Okay, so if I don't create a form, I'm just doing regular HTML here.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, sorry. One question I had. I noticed. So when we do these functions, also take in the event, like the HTML. So on click here's increment, right? Like, are we taking? Does this take in the event here?
I believe so.
Okay.
I think so.
So I should be able to prevent the default there.
Yeah. How you would typically do that actually is that there's a modifier for the directive.
Okay.
So after the click you can do .prevent
here,
and that does that for you.
Oh, cool.
You can't create custom modifiers, but there's like a handful of modifiers for different things. So
cool. Okay, so okay.
Just missing you.
Okay, so we have our form, and then I guess we would have. Okay. Okay, so I'm assuming we have data variables that keep track of what's actually in here. Is that right?
Yeah. So you just create like a new product, and it would be in data there. So like new product is an object with a name and a price.
Right.
And you initialize it to a number and a so how do we bind those values here? There's a directive called v-model. So you can do v-model equals and you do new product.name.
Interesting.
And then you do same thing for the price.
And that handles.
So this is now a two-way binding, right?
Oh, nice.
So when you type into that, we can now access that value on this .new product.
Yeah.
So now really we just need a handler. One thing I might do, it doesn't really matter here, but there is another modifier here. So on v-model for the price, you might want to say, well, that's always going to be a number. By default, that's always going to come out as a string, but you can do .number here, and it'll cast it to a number, whatever's coming out of that.
Cool.
So now we want a function, another method to handle the submission of that form, right?
Okay.
So you can just do this .products.push new product.
This new product, right?
Yes, yeah, you got it. And then you probably want to clear the product.
Right.
Um,
Like that.
yeah.
Okay.
And then we just need to use the submission there. So you can either bind it to the button, but
Or the form.
if you bind it to the form, then when you hit enter, you'll also get a submit.
So is it like that?
Yep. And here you're gonna want to add prevent.
Oh, right.
Because if you don't, it'll refresh the page.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that should now work. You should be able to add your own products.
Cool. Very cool. Okay, so if I want to do form validation, I guess I would just do it in here, right?
Yeah. So you could do it there. I mean, with this approach, like when you're doing everything yourself, I'm not sure how I would set it up. I use a UI framework,
Okay.
which kind of helps with that.
Yeah.
Like there's a decent amount of state to manage with form validation, right?
Right.
So that's probably something that you'd want kind of a generic form component and generic inputs and stuff like that kind of handle that validation is probably the best way to go about it.
Cool.
But yeah, you could do basic stuff of just checking, is there a name? And if there isn't, then, set error message value in data. And then if you'd have a VF up in your template, if there's an error message, show it. That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay. And so I think maybe we'll stop there. I mean, I guess maybe the last question I'll have, and maybe we'll get into this next time we meet. So just passing in and talking about the kind of data down, events up. So I'm guessing if I wanted to pass a handler in, so I could, I mean, in data, in methods, I could create a event handler here that could be passed in as a prop into a child component, right?
Yeah, you could do that.
And then in the child component, I would then have, I could,
you could call that method.
Yeah, right there. And then attach that to like an @click or whatever in here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
I mean, you can also do something like, if you want to look at this really quickly, let's attach a click handler to line 2. So do @click equals, and then inside of this, what we want to do is emit an event backup. To tell the parent which thing was clicked.
Right.
So you might use this for like selecting the
product.
Selecting the product or something. So here you can do $emit, $emit, and then in brackets the name of the event, in parentheses the round ones,
and a string in there, or just literally.
Yeah.
Okay. So then this would emit. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what I like about that, to be honest, over React, is that in React, it's 100% a semantics thing, where it's like you just have to tell developers, like, I know you're passing a method in, but you have to think of it like an event, like that it's a property that takes in a function, and you have to think of it like an event.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a bit more explicit that way, right? So
yeah, so you might need to use a mixture of single and double quotes there.
Oh, right.
So you probably wouldn't want to use on-click necessarily.
Just because it like conflicts with standard.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably be fine, but the way you would end up using this is just going back to app.view. Now you can listen to that event on the product just by doing @onClick, and then make it, alert.
Right.
You don't actually. I don't think you actually have access to alert inside of
But we could have like
the template, but
handle product click.
yeah.
Cool. And then call this.
Yeah. And you can actually pass the product up as well, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask how you do that from here.
So just as a second parameter, just at the product, and then back in here in your handler, you can receive the product. So you should be able to. Yeah.
And then this guy would be used here.
Yeah, avoid using JavaScript keyword.
Oh, is it line 13? Yeah, same thing here. Is it because of the way I named it?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh wait, maybe on. Like, is it?
Yeah, try doing like selected or something. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
So yeah, there you would want just select, not on select.
Okay.
So now, if everything is working,
There we go. Sweet.
There you go.
Very cool. Awesome.
So yeah, that's usually how you would do like sending events back up. But you can do the same thing that you were saying in React, where you actually pass a function through as a prop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So, yeah, again, everybody, thanks for joining, Mark and Ricky, and if anybody else happens to be watching. And Dave, thanks for definitely walking through. I think my initial thoughts are, it's kind of, I'm starting to see a pattern now, in my opinion, about opinionated frameworks. I think it's interesting because I feel like an opinionated framework, I think the big advantage of it is they seemingly have thought of everything that you would ever encounter, and if you learn it, it becomes like, it's one of these things that it's like, if you're an expert at Vue, if you're expert at Rails, these kind of things, you can move so fast, right? You can just like program so fast and so quickly. But at the same time, I guess the downside to it is really the learning takes a little bit longer, because you have to know all, like in this case, I'd have to know all the directives and all the things or whatever, right? Like, one of the things that I found interesting about React in teaching it, it's a very easy thing to teach because there's not a lot to it, to kind of get going or whatever, right? But unfortunately, the negative of that is, like you said, like when you then get into more complex problems, there's no real set way of doing things. You have to kind of look at other libraries, other best practices, and these kind of things. And I think that is more and more becoming now a very concrete pattern in my head in terms of how I look at frameworks. I think it's kind of interesting for me to come from a framework like Rails and go to React, because they're really opposite that way. Like, Rails is super opinionated, super figured out, and React is not. And it's interesting, Mark and Mark's friend Rithik, when I was teaching those guys, that's when it really kind of got solidified for me. I've been teaching Rails for a long time, and the first time when I was teaching them, I really realized, wow, there's actually quite a bit that I have to teach to get going. But it's, again, when you're an expert on Rails, the speed at which you can move is crazy, and the bigger an app gets, and the more problems you solve inside Rails, it's still clean and nice and like, I've been working on a Rails app for 8 years now, and that app still feels very clean and very nice, and if anything, it gets cleaner the more I learn about Rails, right? And it's really nice and set, and that's because all the Rails developers, like the core developers, have figured out basically everything that I would ever want to do in a web app, right?
Yeah. And the other piece to that you really shouldn't forget is when you need to onboard a new developer onto your team, if they've used Rails before, I mean they feel pretty comfortable pretty quickly. Whereas with React, I mean, I as far as I know, there's no set directory structure or anything like that for a project out of the box. So I mean, right there's something they have to get used to. Oh, where do I go to look for this stuff? And this I usually put it over here, and you're putting it here, and that usually starts discussions as well, which aren't always the most productive discussions.
Well, it's true.
It's just something.
It's true.
To
like I'm already seeing that, right? Like I have an app that I'm working on right now where the web app is React, and the mobile app is React Native, which should seemingly have similar file structures, but they don't. And it's not because I'm using React versus React Native. It's just because one developer did one thing and another developer did another thing, right? You're totally right. Yeah. It's like if you're onboarding a new developer in Rails, like it's the easiest thing to jump into, right? Like it's like you can tell a Rails developer, go fix this bug on this page, and within seconds they're at the right place in the code that they need to fix that. Right. So it's definitely a very interesting thing. So I guess it's I feel like it's one of these things where opinionated frameworks, it's not, I shouldn't just say it's opinionated frameworks though. It's like opinionated frameworks. I mean, I guess all opinionated frameworks don't use like convention over configuration, but it's those kind of things where it's like knowing, like something where you have to know all the keywords and all the things that make it work, right? Like for example, like the emit thing, right? That's another thing I got to learn or whatever, because I do definitely feel like when I'm teaching Rails, it's so hard to teach in a condensed way, because like I remember when I taught when I'm teaching like when I'm teaching a form in Rails, and teaching them about form tag, and then form tag has cross-site request forgery protection, which you don't necessarily need to know. But if you don't know that, then when you go to just create a regular form and try to submit it to Rails, it won't work. That aside, when it gets to the controller talking about like strong params, okay, now we got to understand what strong params are. Then we got to understand what mass assignment is and all this stuff. And it feels like you actually have to spend quite a bit of effort kind of educating just to get to kind of a relatively simple place. But the flip side, like you said, is like if you invest that effort and you invest that time, it can be super beneficial, because like I am the biggest Rails fan there is, but it's probably because I've been in it for so long that I know all those things now, and the speed at which I can code in Rails is like super fast, right?
Yeah, and in some ways, like I kind of feel like it's a bit of a fallacy to think, oh, well, I have to learn all this API up front, or like I have to learn where to put these files. So that's like a time cost that I don't want to pay right now. But the reality is, like when you're making the decisions on your own, inevitably you make the wrong ones. And then down the road, you're like, if I did it this way, it would be better. And then you go and change everything. And that I think ultimately leads, I mean, there's certainly benefit to that, because you learned something, and you understand the way that it is, or why the way it is. But there is that cost to time down the road as
Yeah.
well. So
And I think like as someone who like really heavily believes in MVP and all the philosophy surrounding MVP, it's something that's hard for me to reconcile a little bit. It's like, if you are going
mhm.
to go and play around with a bunch of frameworks and test things out, and even beyond just literally experimenting for yourself, but like we're going to invest a little bit of time to build this app to see where it goes, and then later on we can decide to switch frameworks or whatever. It is definitely something that like it can be a really big time investment. Like Rails could be a very big time investment to get to a point where your apps are working really well. But I guess the nice thing about a lot of these opinionated frameworks and like Vue and Rails and stuff like that, I guess the really nice thing is they come built with a lot of tools that you don't have to dive deep, right? Like scaffolding
Yeah,
and like all the stuff that you taught me today. I didn't need to know like the emit, right? I could have just passed in a function and it still would have
yeah,
worked, right? So I guess that's what's nice is that the
yeah.
people who code these things actually have a nice framework of tools around it, right?
Mhm.
Cool. Okay, so we're just kind of wrapping up here. Again, Mark, Ricky, if you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to ask them. I'm just gonna wrap up with kind of one last question here for Dave. Dave, I'm kind of curious though. I mean, I would say the vast majority of developers that I've met and interacted with, um, I would say ultimately their opinions, to be honest, don't necessarily stack up to the best practices that are accepted around the world that are incorporated into things like opinionated frameworks, right? So when you take a framework like Rails, it's not like the Rails developers themselves invented these conventions, right? Like they're following practices that have been well
Mhm.
established in the software community, right? Things like RESTful,
Yeah.
naming, these kind of things. But I do feel like there is a small minority of developers out there who have enough experience to question some of those opinions. I mean, I remember when people started. I mean, it's not like a super opinionated framework, but even questioning, like, say, the performance of jQuery. Like, everybody's using jQuery, and I remember hearing that the Shopify developers were
Yeah.
like, "No, jQuery is bad. It's very not performant. Whatever. We want to create our own." So I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of people who oppose opinionated frameworks because it conflicts against their opinion. Like when they look at a framework like Rails and they think MVC is actually a really terrible architecture. It really doesn't work for things that we're doing or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm curious, just some of your thoughts on that.
Um, yeah, well, it's interesting because for for someone that's kind of in that position where they know well enough to they have a different opinion and it's well grounded and they're competent enough to be able to go in a different direction. Well, that's great. I mean, if they can put together a framework that uses their paradigms and it's as easy to use as Rails, I mean, I'll use
Yeah,
that. Like, I think the thing is like what made Rails popular in the beginning was that pretty much anybody could do it. It was that easy. Um, and for a web app where you need to like have templating and rendering HTML, and you need to be able to take requests and do routing, and you need to access things in the database, and all you had to do in Rails was run a command, and uh, and like you had something working, and then you could start changing things, and you could see it changing. Um, like that's cool to me. And like I don't really care whether it's MVC or you know was it isomorphic or whatever, using the same language on the server as the client and stuff like that, or I don't really care about that stuff
yeah,
so much. What I care about is I can pick it up and start working right away. And that was ultimately like my biggest turnoff on the React side of things, is that I'm afraid of going into an ecosystem like React that's gigantic. And yes, there's some there's some similar or like majority opinion of what the right thing is to do. But when you search for information about React, I mean, you get a lot of information, and a lot of it conflicts. And I don't find that as much with Vue because it's more opinionated. A lot of the decisions are made by the community and not by a single company. So I think it's important that we have a ton of opinions in the community. That's what got us React. That's what got us Vue. And these are really awesome frameworks. But I'm always going to that makes me more productive without needing to do very much.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just us working on things, right? And we were like 5 minutes into it, and I didn't have to tell you what to do anymore.
Right.
Right? Like, certainly you had the React experience already, so you had that to help you, which kind of goes to my point of like, it doesn't really matter what framework you're learning. But I think even if you didn't have the React experience, you would have caught on pretty easily because you knew HTML and you knew CSS and you knew JavaScript. It's just all you need to learn is like, if I want something dynamic, I put it in data. If I want a component, I import it and put it in the components object.
What I find very interesting actually about now seeing Vue is that it's interesting because it sounds like React and Vue again share very similar underlying principles, right? Like of like virtual DOM, state, props, these kind of things. And what's interesting is that you have two very different approaches to the same set of principles, right? Like we've talked about this before about Rails, but there isn't really a lot to compare to Rails. There's not like another framework that does what Rails does, but in a different approach, right? And Vue and React seem to take not only different approaches, but actually very opposed approaches, like you said, like opinionated and non-opinionated approaches to the same set of principles of like component-based functionality, where your CSS, HTML, and JavaScript are all bundled together and are controlled through state and props and things like this. And so I don't feel like I've ever encountered that before actually, where it's like two frameworks that are pretty opposed to each other but are addressing the same problem and based on the same principles. So it's kind of interesting to have this comparison actually.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe say like something like Sinatra versus Rails is like maybe close. Like Sinatra was very stripped down, like streamlined, like trying to be like very minimal, and that's cool for certain things. But what I always kind of think about is like, if you're going to take Sinatra, and this is like similar to React, if you're going to take that tool and then 5 years down the road, you essentially have Rails, but you just built it yourself. Well, you would have been better off to just have Rails probably in the beginning, because I don't know how well your tool's documented, but Rails is documented really well, and lots of people already know how to use it.
Totally. So. Cool. And then just one last question. I said that 3 questions ago, but on that front, I'm curious. Like, I think I know the answer, but again, one of the number one things that attracted me to React, and I'm assuming the same thing was with Vue, that again I've mentioned multiple times that I didn't like about Ember and Angular and all these, is that it is a very easy thing to sprinkle into your app. Like, it's very easy to just like mount it on a small piece of your app. So I'm assuming that if you want to, like, say you had a Rails app and you want to integrate Vue into that, would it be very similar in the sense that you have that like HTML again, like mount point, and you're just putting kind of this component onto that mount point?
Yeah, you can just build components like just like we did here with app.vue, and then like anywhere in your app, you just need to use that little snippet of code from main.js where you instantiate the component, and then you do .mount, and you mount it onto a piece of DOM, and you can do that as many times in your app as you want, right? You can have a bunch of these components, and you're just mounting them like this. Right. And so even if you have an app and like you want to rewrite it in Vue, you can just do it component by component, and like you can do a little piece of a page, and then you can say, oh, let's do like the stuff around that, and you can just take the component that you had before, use it inside of that component, and then mount it onto a new piece of DOM, right? It's very similar to React in that way. It's very easy to just include Vue and start using it. You don't need Vue CLI and the whole build pipeline and everything.
I'm assuming Webpacker also has some built-in support for Vue.
It does. I mean, I've been doing a lot of playing around there. I'm very curious how. Like you're not using Webpacker, are you? Or did you switch to using
Webpacker? Yeah, we're using Webpacker. Yeah.
Okay. I've been playing around a lot with, how to, like what's the best server-side solution. I did some playing around with Firebase. Firebase and React. There's a library called VueFire, which basically makes using Firebase incredibly simple in your app. It's like barely doing anything new compared to what we already went over. But I ran into issues with Firebase because I couldn't actually do unique, like forcing things to be unique in the database, like having a unique index, essentially. Like, as far as I can tell, there's no real good solution to that. So that was kind of a deal breaker for me. So then I wanted to use Rails, but I just felt like it wasn't a good fit. I couldn't find any good information of just how do I set up I want to use Vue client and a Rails API. How do I make that work together? So I'm curious how you set that up on the React side. Like, do you guys use Rails in just API mode, or do you still do?
It is the full blown Rails app, and we just use. So we have Webpacker, and then basically, like Webpacker for React. I can't remember how it works for other frameworks. It probably works for the same for every framework, but it basically gives you like the automatic configuration is that you have a folder called packs, where you can put all your top level basically JavaScript in there, and then all of those JavaScripts will basically mount to the DOM. And then that's all we're doing. We're just mounting like our components in various places in the DOM in the ERB views, basically, like the view templates in Rails. Right. And then really our API calls are just like, how you do regular like JSON responses to like requests to the server. That's all we're doing. And then the nice thing is, because of like jQuery UJS, it's handling all like the cross-site request forgery stuff for us. Any kind of weird stuff with Rails that you kind of would otherwise need to fix. All the UJS stuff is kind of in there for us, and that's actually one of the issues I found with not doing it that way. Like the hurdles that I have to jump through when I don't have UJS is actually a really big problem, actually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to find a good solution, and like I'm not totally happy with um, like Rails. I'm not looking to just sprinkle like Vue components inside of an EJS or a ERB
Yeah.
template. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm looking for the right solution because I want it to be real time as well, and I'm not super familiar with Action Cable, and I don't really feel like it's a great solution
Yeah.
yet.
I actually agree
Um,
with that. Like that's the thing. Like all our React components do start at a Vue. So we still are doing a lot of server side programming with routing and all that stuff
mhm.
like that. And then like you said, any of the real time stuff we're using Action Cable, which I totally agree is a little bit like every time I go through the Action Cable documentation, I do not find it intuitive at all. Actually, I find it a very confusing
Yeah,
part of Rails actually to implement. So
yeah. Compared to like the regular request response, um, it's like WebSockets are totally different. So like what you're used to in Rails, like I get a request in and I respond, like I build up a response and then I
yeah,
send it back. Like it's just it's different. It's something you have to kind of approach differently. It's hard to kind of shoehorn that stuff um, into what Rails has been
yeah,
for
definitely.
so
And
long.
and again, like once everything is set up, like I find the actual subscribing and broadcasting is actually very good, but the setup is very again not intuitive. Like the objects that you have to set up don't really make a ton of sense to me the way they've done it. Like to me, it would seem like
Hmm.
really easy if you're literally subscribed to a channel and you publish to a channel. That should be the only thing you should be concerned about. You shouldn't have to figure
Yeah,
everything else out, right? So, but yeah.
yeah,
So, anyways, it is getting late. It's 10 o'clock. We could talk
yeah.
forever about this. Me and Dave don't see each other that often, and when we do, it is endless chats like this. Ricky did say thank you, Dave, for teaching about Vue. Yeah, huge thanks to Dave. It seems like OBS seems to shrink your feed and expand your feed, so maybe that's a sign that everything's crapping out and kind of falling apart now. But Dave, listen, thanks so much. First of all, for supporting this stream as long as you have. There were a lot of nights where it
Yeah.
was literally just you watching me for a couple hours, so I really appreciate that. And Mark, I want to thank for suggesting us getting this together, and then ultimately thank you for kind of coming tonight and teaching us about Vue. Really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's a ton of fun. Yeah, hopefully it'll work out to do it again in a couple of weeks, and yeah, we can dive even deeper or talk about
Sounds
something
great.
else.
So, yeah. So again, if you guys are just joining us and you missed the announcement, we are reducing the frequency of these Software Live editions to once every 2 weeks. So every second Thursday at 8 p.m. live, we're going to do that. We are scheduled now that not next week, but the week after, we are going to bring Dave back to continue this discussion on Vue. We gave React 2 or 3 sessions. I think it's only fair we give Vue 2 or 3 sessions so you guys can make your own opinions. But it is really interesting talking about this, and because so much in software engineering, I find we go to our job and we just kind of learn what we're given, or we jump on whatever the most popular thing is at the time. It's very interesting to look at it from an objective point of view to say, okay, let's take a look at this and evaluate it now and talk about it. So Dave, I very much appreciate the chat and very much appreciate you spending the time tonight. Do you have anything else to say before I kind of wrap things up, or
No, I mean, for anyone that's watching, like definitely just if you find Vue interesting, if you find React interesting, like just start playing with it, and if you get bored of one tool, just switch to another tool. Like just pursue whatever kind of excites you, because even if you're a student, like that's going to be hugely beneficial to you. Just an employer is going to be floored that you're actually building things and playing around with tools and know your way around different pieces of technology. So,
awesome. That's great advice, Dave. Thanks.
yeah.
And do you have any public handles, or if anything, anybody wants to get in touch with you, like should they just message me and I'll forward on the message to you? Like if they have any questions or anything in terms of trying to get in touch with you?
I mean, basically anywhere. My handle is D3 Chapman, Chapman, or sorry, no N on the end. Yeah, D3 Chapman. So you can reach me on Twitter, on GitHub, on basically anything at that handle.
Okay, I'm going to type that in the chat right now. D3 Chapman. Perfect. So if you guys want to get a hold of Dave, ask him questions, reach out to him. He is a wealth of information, always interested in what he has to say. So thanks, everybody. That's it. If you haven't yet done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and we will definitely be in touch in 2 weeks. So back here 2 weeks with Dave. Thanks so much, Dave, for everything. We're going to end it there. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys later.
See ya.